We're going a little bit more casual today with this comfy sweater because it's really cold in my house, so don't mind me. Today I'm doing my January wrap-up. I finished 4 things. I DNF'd 2 things, which never happens, like ever. And I started 3 new things towards the end of the month that I obviously didn't finish. So I'm going to talk about all of those things today, and I'm going to start with the 4 things that I did finish. So the first book that I finished in January, finally, I am so excited that I finally got through this book, was A Storm of Swords by George R.R. Martin. This book, I think, is the first one in the series that I actually gave 5 stars. Like, this is definitely my favorite one of the bunch. And yeah, it was just great. I feel like a lot of people say the same thing. I think this is like the overwhelming majority of people's favorite book in A Song of Ice and Fire. And yeah, I have to agree. This is so good. The plot moves forward so much. There's so much action. It's just so good. It was just an all-around great book. I loved it. It took me a while to get into. Once I started alternating between the physical and the audiobook, that's when it really kind of kickstarted it for me, and I got it done. So I started the year finishing a chunky book. Then I moved into something a little bit smaller. I finished An Unkindness of Magicians by Kat Howard. That book was only like 350 pages. I gave it 5 stars. I thought it was amazing. For the fact that it's such a short book, she does so much with it. Basically, the concept is it takes place in New York City, and there's this thing called the Unseen World, and it's basically all the magician families that live in New York City. And I think it's every 20 years they have this thing called the turn, or the turning. Shoot. I should have looked this up before I started filming this video. Anyway, they have basically this big competition to decide who's going to be the ruling family in the unseen world. And this book kind of drops you right in the middle of the action of one of these turnings. I am so unprepared, always. But yeah, it drops you right in the middle of one of these competitions, and you kind of just have to like piece it together as you go and following these main characters. There's a bunch of different perspectives in it, so you kind of get to see from a bunch of different people's point of views about the turning. So they all have fairly gray morality. Like, it's hard to tell who's really good and who's supposed to be like the villain. And I really love that in a book. I just think it was done really well. And my only issue with this book was that it was too short. Like, I wish she had fleshed it out a little bit more. There are definitely aspects of it that I would have liked more information about. But overall, it was just great. And I think it was a standalone, but I think there's a sequel coming out at some point this year, maybe. So when that happens, I'll definitely pick it up. The next thing I finished was All Through the Night by Mary Higgins Clark. This was actually a Christmas book. I gave this 3 stars. There's definitely an audience for Mary Higgins Clark, and she just passed away a couple days ago, so I feel like I need to be gentle in what I'm saying about her work. There's definitely an audience for Mary Higgins Clark. I'm not sure if I'm that audience. This book was written in 1998, and it follows 2 of her like recurring characters, Elvira and Willie, and they're trying to solve this mystery of like 7 years ago, someone stole this chalice from a church on the same night that someone left a baby on the church steps. And through a series of events in the book, they're trying to figure out both of those mysteries, like who the mother is of this child and who stole the chalice. There were just some things in this book that seemed a little dated. There were like character traits for the main characters that I assume you're supposed to like that I just wasn't a huge fan of. Elvira especially was very judgy. And honestly, things were just kind of too convenient at some points. But yeah, they had this friend who passed away, and like they didn't say very nice things about her. I don't know, something about it just wasn't my cup of tea, if you will. So yeah, I gave it 3 stars. There's definitely an audience for Mary Higgins Clark, but I don't think I'm it. I have a couple more of her books. Whether I'll actually read them or not, I don't know. Whether they'll get an unhaul when I do my unhaul eventually, we'll find out. But yeah, that's the 3rd thing that I finished in January. And then the last thing I finished in January is I don't know, actually. I was gonna say is the thing that I'm most excited about, but I'm really excited that I finished A Storm of Swords too, so I don't know. But this is a book that I was really looking forward to reading, and I've been putting off for whatever reason for a really long time, and I finally got to it, and I loved it. I gave it 5 stars, and that was The Final Empire, which is the first book in the Mistborn trilogy by Brandon Sanderson. This book was so good. Brandon Sanderson is just like, he's just like the best author. I don't know how to explain his writing, but like, I've said it before in another video at some point. Brandon Sanderson does this thing where he brings you along for the ride, and, you know, you're really enjoying it. There's stuff happening, but you're not really sure exactly how it's all going to fit together. And then the end comes, like the last 100 pages or so come, and all of a sudden, everything makes sense. You're caught up in such like this crazy web of plot that it's just so awesome. Like, he does such a good job with it. And this is my 3rd Sanderson book, and it's the 3rd time that I've still been blown away. Like, you get to the end and you're just like, that was amazing. Like, what did I just read? I loved it. So yeah, there's 2 things, and I said this in a vlog a couple weeks ago. There's 2 things that kind of bothered me about this, but they were only like, they're things that would probably only bother me. 1, the magic system is based on ingesting metals. So the characters, in order to use their magic, legitimately like eat metal, and then they burn it in their stomach. And that just gives me this vision of them just having like a ball of like leftover metal, like ashes in their stomach that's just like 100 pounds. And that's kind of gross to me. But I mean, that's not something that's in the book. That's just my own mental picture. And the other thing is, there's these characters called Inquisitors, and I'm not going to like say anything about them, but every time they were described in the book, it just really like, it made me shudder and kind of grossed me out a little bit just because of something about them. But yeah, those are the only 2 things about that book that I was kind of like, ugh. Doesn't hurt the rating, obviously. I still gave it 5 stars. I really, really enjoyed it, and I cannot wait to pick up the next one. Those are all the books that I finished this month. On to my DNFs. The first thing I DNF'd was Notes from a Small Island by Bill Bryson. This book was not for me. I was reading it on my Kindle, and just... So his writing style, I feel like, is supposed to be kind of satirical or comical, but his jokes didn't really hit with me. 2 things that bothered me, like that stick out in my head the most, are at one point he was staying in a hotel and he was eating in the restaurant, and he did this whole thing, this like 2-page long thing about how there was this fat family there and they ate all the food so that he had to eat like their scraps because that's all that was left on the meal carts, or the carts that had the food on them. Like, he wanted this one particular dessert and they ate it all, so he had to get this subpar dessert because the fat people ate all the food. Like, it was just this thing, and it went on too long, and, you know. And then the other thing that really irritated me and really, really stuck with me in a bad way was he was in a park at one point, and he mentioned a dog walking by, like a man walking by with a dog, and he described it as the kind of dog you want to kick, not to be mean, but just to see how far it would go or something like that. And I'm an animal lover. I'm a dog lover. So reading that, it just like wasn't funny to me. It didn't strike a chord with me at all. And really, it just made me kind of angry, because no matter how small or fluffy or whatever a dog is, you don't want to kick it just to see how far it'll go. Like, that was just really weird to me. I didn't like it. So yeah, I stopped reading that. I was not a fan. My little heart doesn't do very well with DNFing, so at the time I said, oh, maybe I'll go back to it, especially since it's for my 100 books bucket list challenge thing. But in reality, I don't think I'll ever go back to that. I don't want to read any more of that. I don't want to put myself through that. So I think Bill Bryson is just not the author for me, and that's okay. This next one, I'm more upset about, and I also think there is a possibility that I'll go back to it, and that is Uprooted by Naomi Novik. This I was reading for like a buddy read that Jen over at the Book Refuge was doing on her Discord, and it was pretty much like a unanimous DNF. I think there was one person that finished it, and she was kind of like, it was okay. So I really just had no desire to continue at that time. I got 167 pages in. So I did read a decent chunk of it, but I don't know if it was just the time I was reading it or what, because I do know people that say this book is great, but then there's also people that say this book is not great. So I don't know. I might at some point pick this one back up and try to read it again. So this ended up on my on-hold shelf on Goodreads, which are books that I put down for whatever reason, but there's a very good chance I'll pick back up, as opposed to my DNF shelf, which is stuff that I will never ever try to read again, which is probably where Notes from a Small Island is going to end up. Just being honest. Okay, and then the last three things that I'm going to talk about real quick are things that I started in the month of January and I'm going to finish in the month of February. The first one is Dry by Neil and Jared Schusterman. This is a book about an apocalyptic water crisis in Southern California. Like, they have this thing called the tap out where there is no water left in Southern California. And we follow a group of teenagers just kind of trying to navigate through this apocalyptic world that they're living in and kind of come to terms with the fact that the world is still turning around them and like people are still going on with their daily lives while they're living in this like apocalyptic scenario. But I do think it's an important topic and I'm really happy that this book exists, and I hope that a lot of people read it because it tackles a very tough topic in a very accessible way. So I'm really enjoying that. I'm about 75% through it now, and I'm gonna finish it soon. And I see it getting a high rating, unless something really terrible happens in the last 25% of the book. Okay, the next thing that I have is Fairy Tale by Danielle Steele. I'm reading this on my Kindle. I'm not really enjoying this, but it's so short that I want to finish it, which doesn't really make sense. But I've already DNF'd 2 books for January, so I don't want to start off February with a DNF. But just in general, I don't think I'm a fan of Danielle Steele's writing. This is turning out to be something completely different than I thought it would be. I'm halfway through it, and like, I thought it was a Cinderella retelling, but I'm halfway through it, and like, there's really no, like, we know basically who the evil stepmother is going to be, but other than that, there's nothing remotely Cinderella-y happening yet, so I don't really know when that's going to come into play. And I thought we would be following the daughter, because it's kind of sold as a Cinderella retelling, but really right now we're just kind of following the father and the stepmother, and I'm not really interested in them. So yeah, I don't know how I feel about that one. And then the final book that I have that I started in January and I am hoping to continue in February is House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielowski? Whatever his name is. I really need to look up how to pronounce that. But yes, this book is weird, and I don't really know how to summarize it or explain it at all. But basically I picked it up because I've heard a lot of people talk about it, but I've never actually heard any like solid opinions on it. So that's intriguing, as well as like there's interesting formatting to it where like there's some pages with like no words and like just like weird stuff, and there's pictures. So it's just interesting. But while I'm actually reading it, I'm not particularly enjoying it. The issue I have with this is there are footnotes that like are a whole different story. Well, not a whole different story. They're definitely related, but you have like the main story that you're reading, and then there's a footnote, and the footnote goes on for like 2 pages, and then by the time you're done reading the footnote, you don't actually remember what was happening in the actual like text part of it. So let me see if I can find an example real quick. Okay, so like this. The text goes like this page and then to here, and then this is all a footnote, and it goes on to the next page. The whole next page is a footnote. This whole page is a footnote. And then you start back on the original story here, only to be followed by, oh wait, another footnote. So it's just very strange. Like, I don't know. I don't know. I'm not very far. I'm gonna keep going. And yeah, I'll see how I feel about it. Maybe I'm starting to understand why there's not very many, like, concrete opinions on this book, because it's just weird. And so far, like, I'm like, I don't think I'm liking it, but I still want to read it because it's weird. And that's like the best summary I can give you. It's weird, and I want to keep reading it even though I don't know if I'm liking it. So, yeah, we're going to continue on with that. So there you have it. These are some of the books that I read in January, as well as ebooks and audiobooks that I really enjoyed. And yeah, I read some stuff. I have some stuff to keep reading, and I had 2 DNFs, which never ever happens to me. Like, when I tell you I don't DNF books, I never DNF books. So the fact that I had 2 in 1 month, yeah, January was an interesting month. But I did say I wanted to get better about DNFing books in 2020, so I guess we're off to a good start with that. These are the books that I read in January. I hope you had a great reading month in January. And yeah, that's it for this one. I will see you next time. Bye.